Hi guys, and welcome back to my Patreon tutorials. So for today, as suggested by a wonderful patron, I'm going to do a draw along kind of tutorial. So I'm going to put the reference up here, and I'm going to stick the link to the reference in the description as well, and make sure that you've got access to it. So feel free to grab your pencils and draw along with me. So for today's draw along, we're going to do this horse that I've got up in this top left hand corner. So as always, I like to start off with the head. I think that gives a good basis for kind of proportions for the rest of the animal. So I'm going to start up here. I'm going to draw a circle. And this is just a guideline, and we'll build up around it anyway. This is a fairly large circle from what the reference is showing, so it's probably going to shrink a little bit in the process. So I tend to then build up around that. I like to kind of get the face in. So we've got a bit of a downward slope in this horse's face. So I'm just going to draw that bridge of the nose down here. I'm then going to put in kind of the triangular shape. So if you pay attention to the reference, the horse head itself is it's like a triangular rectangle, if that makes any sense at all. So paying attention to angles, and I'm just going to bring in that lower jawline as well. The muzzle itself, or the mouth, I tend to put a little circle in here as well, just because it is a bit rounded, and the chin of the horse kind of comes down like that. So I'm just going to show you how to build up the structure, and then we'll go into the finer details later. So I think this is kind of big for this bit of paper. I think it's going to end up being squashed a little bit. So I'm just going to bring in those lines a little bit more so you can see. So this is the jawline. This is the bridge of the nose, and down to where the nostrils will be, down to where the mouth is, and then you've got the chin there. So next I'm going to draw in the neck. The nape itself kind of comes up and falls away down like this. And again, this is quite a triangular shape, so I'm just going to draw in where the throat goes. And I'm going to bring that line across, kind of finish off this semi-triangular shape here. You can very lightly see a triangle here. Then for the shoulder, again, is quite a triangular shape. So I'm just going to bring this down ever so slightly, top of the shoulder. And then where the shoulder blade and everything comes in, I'm just going to draw that line down here. And then this is where the elbow is. And then that's going to come up to the front of the shoulder, which is kind of rounded. And bring those two lines together. So it's up to you. I'm doing this kind of step by step. I think it can be useful to kind of sketch all the shapes out first. So what I'm going to do is going to show you how to do the rib cage. So this is kind of like a long oval shape here. This is where the ribs of the animal will be. Just popped in a very light oval shape. His belly comes down here. And then the top of the back comes out to here. Just paying attention to the kind of proportions. So the back of a horse is quite long. So it slopes down from the shoulder to the lower back and up towards the hips. Again, that's kind of a rounded top. And then this can be kind of an oval shape as well. So I'm just going to bring in this oval shape. It's a very warped oval, but it gives you a general idea of where the pelvis is and where the knee is. So as you can see, there's a bit of a structure coming up here. You can draw in just to remind where your rib cage is. Rib cages are quite big on a horse, they actually probably go like this. It's just to give you an idea of where the shapes are. So now I like to draw in the legs. So the front right leg is bent, so I tend to pop in a little kind of circle for where the elbow is. And I'll pop in roughly where the wrist is, which is, it kind of falls in line with this part of the horse's jaw. So you can draw like a little guideline down just for your own reference, and then pop in the wrist shape here. So this length from elbow to wrist is roughly the same length as the head of the horse. So that's just something to bear in mind to make sure that you're kind of getting things in proportion. So I haven't got a ruler. Let's look at it with a ruler. It doesn't have to be this specific, but the length of the head here, according to my ruler, is about 4.5 centimeters. So elbow to wrist, it's just a bit over, but it's roughly 5 centimeters, 4.5 centimeters. So it's just something to bear in mind. They're similar lengths, which we're going to refine anyway as we go. So once I've got these shapes in, I'm just going to draw the top of the leg in, and then underneath the leg as well to bring that in. Now the wrist to the kind of hoof area is in the front leg actually quite a bit shorter than this bit, so you want to pay attention and make sure that this bit isn't, this part of this bone here, this part of the leg isn't longer than this part of the leg. You can round that off as well. Do feel free to pause or stop the video at any point if you need to catch up, and skip back or skip forward as much as you need in order to kind of do these shapes as well. So the hoof itself, I'm going to bring in that bone a little bit shorter. This is why we do guidelines and stuff first, is that we can either erase them or we can draw over them, because they will be imperfect and you'll need to make adjustments as you go. So I brought that bone in ever so slightly. There's a small bone that comes down here that connects the end of this joint to the hoof. The hoof itself, I tend to do a warped triangle shape. You can do whatever shape is easiest for you. I'm just going to bring in this hoof, paying attention to that curve of the bone that comes down here. So there's a little shape there. Cool. So we'll do the other legs now. So I'm paying attention to this line and I'm realizing that actually this is too high up. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to adjust this belly line. I'm going to bring that and make sure the chest falls kind of halfway of the elbow, making sure that there's a deep bit there. Now, as you can see in the reference, there's also a part of the kind of chest muscle here. So this is the shoulder, but I'm going to bring in a chest muscle here. Thinking that actually this belly isn't deep enough either. So I'm just going to, you can erase it, you can do whatever. I'm just going to draw in and make sure that belly is a little bit fuller. As you can see. Now I'm going to bring in that other leg and paying attention to where that leg is visible. It's visible just past the elbow. So I'm just going to bring in that line here. Again, paying attention to the length of that bone here and where these lines intercept. So according to my reference, the wrist bone kind of falls again along this very similar lines just past the chin, the jaw. So I'm just going to pop this bone in round about next to the hoof actually, because according to the reference the the hoof and the wrist are very close together. I'm just going to bring in the top line and connect those together. Now, the lower part of the leg just goes, it kind of grazes past the hoof, paying attention to not make them be next to each other. And again, bring in that lower bone here. And then the hoof. Got a similar shape. Just paying attention to where that bone extends, or that hoof extends. So this hoof is actually off the floor, but for this purpose, obviously, if it's just a sketch, just a drawing, we're kind of improvising anyway. So then I go on to do the back legs. This rump line comes down to about here. I might even make it slightly larger, paying attention to how I've adjusted this line. I'm just going to bring that out ever so slightly. It's a little bit better. So what I do here is I also put in the knee, which is around about here. This is the kind of pivot joint for where the leg kind of hinges off. The knee itself is quite a large part of the horse's body. So then I'm looking at my reference and I'm kind of seeing, where does the lower limb go? And it's actually pretty much directly below the knee itself. So I'm just going to pop in another hinge joint. This is the ankle. Now what I can do is I connect those lines together like this and bring that in as well. So at the minute it's looking kind of silly. I think it looks a bit wonky, but it's okay because we're just kind of practicing. I might bring that line in. I'm going to erase it because it's getting a bit messy now. See, I always adjust as I go. If things don't look right, I will just adjust as I go. I try not to erase if I can, just because it's a habit that I have. But it's always okay to just adjust as you go. Now we're going to look at where the hoof lies. So the hoof is actually just almost pretty much directly below the middle of the belly. So I can put a little sketch in there. You probably can't see it because it's so faint. But this is roughly where the hoof lies. And paying attention to the front leg and where the back leg is, I can see that this hoof is actually lower down, because this hoof is supposed to be elevated, whereas this hoof is supposed to be on the ground. So I might just pop in a rough placement for the end of the bone, so I can kind of sketch in this bone here. Round it off. So lots of these bones are a bit thicker than I would like at the minute, but we can finish that off when we kind of finish the sketch. Now the ankle, this is the ankle, this is the kind of toe bone, kind of extends in a very straight line here to where the hoof is. I'm just going to place that roughly here. I've realised that they're on the same level, so maybe I'll go back and adjust the length of this bone, or even extend this a little bit further. So it's just always worth bearing in mind where the reference places everything. Trying to be, when you're learning, trying to be as accurate as possible, but obviously if you're stylizing anything, that's fine. You can make it look however you want to look. That's the benefit of being an artist, is that you can do it exactly how you want. Accuracy, is beneficial, but it's not the be-all end-all. So there. got the placement of that right leg. Now I'm going to place the back leg. So sorry, the back left. Paying attention to where kind of the rump falls. Seeing how the knee at the far side is about here. It's probably more like about here, but you can't really see it, so. And seeing that this line kind of extends that way. The ankle itself, so you can always compare the ankles between, the two that you've drawn or the ones that you've drawn already. So this ankle is kind of lower down than this ankle. I'm just going to bring that ankle up ever so slightly. Place it here. Again, just completely rough. We're just sketching this in for the time being. Bring in that front part of the leg, extend it down to where the ankle is. Doing the same here. Looking at the angles of the lines as well. And there's the point of the ankle joint. And that pretty much goes down just vertically. I might have miscalculated the size of the drawing ever so slightly. So this back hoof is probably going to be fairly hidden. Paying attention to where the angles are. It's hard to see the back hoof actually on this reference anyway, but that's it roughly kind of placed in there. So there you've got your basic horse structure. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to start placing extra details which I can refine later when it comes to actually finishing off the sketch. So it's good to look at the reference and see if there are any kind of defining muscles. For example, in the neck here, there's a ridge of muscle that goes all the way along from the shoulder along the back of the neck. So I'm starting to think that the head is fairly small on this drawing that I've done. Just kind of paying attention to how this reflects to the rest of the illustration. So I think I've made some of it a bit chunkier than it should be, which I will deal with in the next stage. So obviously this line is, I can erase the bits that, make him look a bit too chunky in the back end. I think his proportions are ever so slightly off, but for this exercise, it's just about learning how to place shapes. I don't want to be accurate for you as well, so I'm just going to kind of show you areas that I want to adjust. Bringing in, making these legs slightly less chunky. I think with having drawn lots of red line, it makes it look probably chunkier than I actually have drawn it. Kind of makes it look a bit off. I think that's getting slightly better. Maybe this back line could be brought down a bit as well. There you go. A bit better. So like I said, we're going to start drawing in some muscles here. I'm looking at the nape of the neck. There's a large muscle that kind of comes down here as well. There's always one that comes from, along the throat. And the shoulder, there's like a swell of muscle here. And the ribs, you can kind of ever so slightly sketch in here. And there's a wall, like a big wall of muscle here as well. Cool. So you can kind of sketch in as well, like muscles and sinew along the legs here. between the two bones here. Just roughly sketching in where I like to place specific bones, specific muscles for future reference when I come to finish this drawing. There's lots of sinew, there's lots of tissue, there's lots of tendons. And obviously if you're doing a sort of stylized piece, it's up to you how much detail you put into it. But yeah, it's always up to you. While I'm here, I'm going to place the ears. So the ears kind of fall at the top of the head. I'm going to pop in the base of the ear because they always kind of pivot around this little circular bit here. And for the time being, I'm just going to draw in these rough shapes. And then the eye. It's probably like an ear's length, if that makes sense. The same length as the ear down to where the eye is. And then the nostril, placing right at the end. The mouth itself, little corner of the mouth here. It's good practice to probably have a look at drawing horses' mouths as well. That's probably a tutorial I'll do for a later time, because horse mouths are very squishy, very pliable, a lot of expression there. Just drawing in that for reference later. So now that I've got the guideline down, I'm also going to place in the tailbone. So it's entirely up to you whether you follow the reference or you make it up as you go along. I really like doing my own, touches on things. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw the tailbone in, and then I build up the hair from the tailbone. So I might stick to kind of what the reference is showing me. And just remember there's a bone that kind of goes along. It's an extension of the spine. So if the spine comes along here, it extends for a little bit past, and that's just where all of the tail hair is going to connect to. So at the minute it looks a bit strange, but I'll build up upon that afterwards. I haven't got much space at this end of the paper, so maybe you've got a bit more room to kind of play with it, but do feel free to just have a play with the tail. And also for the mane, I like to do long flowy manes, so I'm probably going to play with that a bit, because obviously this horse is cantering, it's galloping, so there in my mind would be a bit of flow to the mane. So I'm just going to throw in some guide blocks for the mane, and I recommend just playing with this and doing it exactly how you want. You can copy me if you want, but do feel free to really get abstract and make it your own. Just going to throw in a few extra blocks here, paying attention to how much of the mane there will be visible. And then the forelock itself, I think I'm going to bring in actually past the kind of ears here, like so. So what I'll do there is in the next stage I'll go over with a darker pencil and start to build up on the lines that I've already drawn. So I'll see you there in a second. So now I'm going to go and start refining this sketch that I've done. So I've got my black pencil here, and it's up to you whether you follow your reference, but once you've got your proportions you can kind of play with things and make it exactly how you want it to look. So I'm just going to start sketching in. Rubbish pencil. So I'm just going to draw in my outlines. Start bringing in those shapes. So this is your opportunity to kind of adjust things, if a line isn't quite right in the sketch or in the red pencil or whatever pencil you've put down beforehand, you can just, change it up a little bit. So I'm kind of going off the knowledge I have of horse faces and stuff now, so I'm not really paying attention to my reference anymore. But feel free to continue looking at your reference. So I'm just adding in stuff like the nostril tissues and nose tissues, drawing in a few extra lines to add a bit of detail. Putting that cheekbone in. Just bringing in and adding little details. Do the mane. You can also use this chance to start shading. It's up to you whether you shade as you go. I tend to. Or you can wait until you've got all the lines in and shade from there. You don't even have to shade if you don't want to. You want to just stick to the lines, that's fine. So you can use my main drawing tutorial if that helps. Just gonna go with the flow. I'm just using the chance to kind of correct the lines, you know, and adjust the shape somewhat. Just paying attention, you know, I've got some experience in drawing horses, so a lot of this is kind of coming from muscle memory now, but feel free to continue looking at your reference to help get those shapes, you know, to where you are happy with them. I think it's important not to be too perfectionist about it, especially when you're learning. So just enjoy the process. A lot of these lines I'm quite happy with, but anything that's not quite right, now is a fantastic opportunity to just make simple adjustments. And for example, this line here, I'm not going to draw this entire line because it's just a guideline, but I will just bring in a little bit of kind of definition here. So that's another thing, is even if you've drawn the line as a part of the sketching process, doesn't mean that line has to be drawn in its entirety, because obviously they're just construction lines. So let's move down to the legs. And as you start building up, especially if you've gone from something like a red pencil or a light pencil, and you start building up with something softer or darker, if you choose to not erase those guidelines, those construction lines, they kind of disappear into the background anyway as a part of sort of the illusion of, you know, the way that light works and how dark things appear stronger. So I just, out of habit, tend not to get rid of the guidelines. I think they look kind of cool anyway. But that's entirely up to you. You know, if you've, say, gone over in pen, you can quite easily erase those lines. The red pencil that I've used is actually erasable. So I could get rid of it in theory if I chose to. I think proportions wise my horse is okay. I think it could be better. But I'm not one for perfectionism at all. I think, to me, as long as it looks like what I want it to look like, I'm pretty satisfied. I'm sure it won't win any realism competitions, but after all, that's not what I'm aiming for. I'll use this chance to bring in some of those muscle lines as well. Perhaps throw in some shading as well. So even though I've got this guideline here, I could use it as a chance to just shade in and get an idea of where those shapes are. So when I shade, I like to kind of draw a line where the shadow is going to go, and I think that just helps it define it a bit more. Like I said, I'm not a realistic artist by any means, and I think it's just part of my style to throw in these, you know, these extra lines and shapes. But obviously you do what makes you happiest. You do what's in your style. You know, I think even if you do the same thing as I do, that's still your style. It doesn't mean that you're copying in any way. I don't think a style is something that you can steal. I think, you know, sure, talking about, you know, people drawing Disney characters in the same as Disney style, maybe, but ultimately style is how you hold a pencil, how you hold your implement, and the way that you use it. And I think no matter what, even if you're kind of mimicking someone, you're still doing it in your own way. So please, you know, use these videos as inspiration, copy them if you need to, but remember that you're using them to help build up your own techniques. And don't be afraid to try new things, you know, do things differently to me. Just because I'm doing it this way does not mean at all that it's the only way to do it. I'm just drawing. I tend to draw in a few ribs here, add a bit of shadow. Just because most horses, when they're running, you can kind of see the ribs, unless they're, you know, perhaps on the chunky side. I wouldn't want to see all of those ribs. If you did see all of those ribs, it suggests that the horse would probably be quite underweight, but, you know, again, just stylistic preferences. So, got a bit of area here. I know it's going to be shadow. Let's go down to the leg. So I am kind of drawing a lot of these lines in one long motion, and I think that just helps make things look a bit smoother. And I'm not saying that you have to do it this way. It's just a choice, and obviously the more confident you get, the easier it will become to do those really straight lines. So by all means practice just drawing things with one long line. See what happens. You know, I certainly don't think that if you've never drawn with one straight line before, I'm not expecting, well, you certainly shouldn't expect them to be perfect the first time round. But it is a really good thing to practice because it is really good for hand-eye coordination. So if that's something you want to work on, try drawing lines in one long swoop. Add in the shadow here. I think when you do one long line, it can give this nice impression of confidence, and that you've gone, I know exactly where I want that line to go. And then when you're looking at it, or other people are looking at your work, you can go, you know, that person looks confident. So, you know, you're definitive, you're going, I want that line there, so I'm going to make it there. And that can be quite impressive to people. Let's draw in this back leg here as well. My pencil's getting a bit blunt now, but well, I like to vary the line width anyway. Don't want them all the same thickness. I think it can be interesting, or certainly an interesting effect to go from thick to thin to thick and so on. I'm very conscious that this back leg is perhaps shorter than it ought to be, but I'm very aware that I've given myself way too little room on this part of the page, so I might just leave it without going too much into trying to fix it now, because it would kind of mean redrawing the whole thing, and honestly I don't think it's that big a deal. Throw in some shade, some shadow. So the last thing to do is this tail. So I'm going to go off my own stylistic preferences. You can copy me, you can mimic, whatever, but again, I haven't got much space on this end of the page. So what I might do is kind of have the tail flopping over slightly. So how I see it is this end of the hair has kind of gone up and is flopping back down. I might just do that. And then where this chunk of hair has gone up this way, it might be that the rest of it is parted here. So a bit that's gone like this, so that's going to tuck into there. And the rest of it is going to flop down. Because that's one thing to bear in mind, is that, you know, manes and tails are made up of lots of different strands, and they can all do their own thing. They tend to stick together in clumps, but you can have rogue hairs and rogue, you know, bits of fur. So just gonna give an idea of where the hair might flow. This bit that's flopped over the top might have a bit that's kind of twisted like that. So it's just an idea of what you can do, even if you're running out of space on the page like I am. So let's go back to my pencil, give him a sharpen, and then start to put in, broken the pencil again, start to pop in those. I did sharpen it, I tried to anyway. Perhaps I was pressing a little bit too hard with the pencil. So I've just drawn like a little zigzag here to imply where there's folds of hair. Again, drawing hair, manes and tails and stuff. They're quite therapeutic and really good if you do it in these bold, long strokes. So I do encourage you to practice that. I think you'll find it very rewarding. And don't worry too much about making those lines perfect, because they'll go where they want to, especially if there's imperfections in the paper. You know, you just let it flow, let it do its thing, and work with it. Very therapeutic, quite soothing. So this bit, I'll draw a little bubble there, flow round. A little rogue hair that's come out like that. A bit of shading. So something like that. Just realised you couldn't see any of that. That's good. Sorry about that, my camera angle was a bit terrible there. So can you see? I'll show you this again. Curving up and round. So there you have it. After that you should have a horse drawing, a horse sketch with the reference picture that I showed you. So I hope you enjoyed that. And please let me know in any way, shape or form whether you find that really helpful or whether you'd like to see a certain animal drawn in this way. I think this was a really fun tip, a really fun way of filming. So I will do more of these, definitely. Thank you so much for watching. As always, thank you for your support, and I can't wait to see you for the next video. Bye guys.